Today I will be discussing the Boston Globe Horn Book Award. First, a little about the award. It was founded in 1976. It has three yearly categories plus a special citations category. More specifically, I will be focusing on the fiction and poetry category for this project. The award seeks to recognize excellence in children's literature. There's no limit to how many books a publisher can submit, and the only real rules are that the book must be published in America and that it must be published within the year that the award is awarded. The books are reviewed by three judges who are children's literature experts, who I tried to reach out to and contact, but they never did get back to me when I asked them about what their process was for selecting the best books or how many books they work through each year, things like that. I never did get those answers, unfortunately. Now, a little bit more about the book. There are many genres for many different age groups. So there are a large swath of genres represented, whether it's realistic fiction or fantasy or fictional accounts of real events. There are a large number of genres represented in this category. And they are targeted for many different age groups, whether they are young children or teens and tweens. That being said, there is a focus on coming of age stories that are written for teens and tweens. And these stories are usually very didactic and shoehorn in at least one major moral component. But some of these stories are more progressive too. But these books usually have been typically slow to represent more contemporary issues, and I'll get more into that later. But while they might represent something like the Black Lives Matter movement, they tend to underrepresent certain communities such as the LGBTQ plus community. And for the progressive books that do win, they usually have a larger base of support. For example, The Hate U Give has a large base with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so while these books are progressive and they do add necessary comments to an ongoing discussion, they don't always hit every single discussion that needs to be had. Usually the books also focus on one topic at a time, so rather than trying to cross-cut a whole bunch of different topics, they focus on one thing at once. Anything else that is included is there really just to add texture to the story and isn't really meaningful to the story in any significant way. That being said, there's very little intersectionality with these books. Like I mentioned earlier, they're mostly didactic and simple, and the topics are rarely blended, though there are some exceptions. Again, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian is a great example of this, where they cross-cut a lot of ideas. What I notice is that the traits that are blended are usually stereotypical. For example, you have a middle class white person going out on an adventure, and they might bring in some other topics with that, but it's pretty stereotypical. Or lower class minorities and immigrants seeking to be accepted by the world or just trying to get by. These books do have an important message, but these traits tend to be pretty stereotypical, so it kind of can put kids in a box if they get the wrong idea, if they read too many of the same stories. I think it's also important to note who's been ignored in these awards, and I noticed two main groups of people, the LGBTQ plus community and non-neurotypical people. They rarely show up in the books, and when they do, they're really just a side character, and they really have no consequence on the story. They're very underrepresented in this award from what I have found. As for my praise and criticism of the award goes to renowned authors as well as new ones. For example, with The Hate U Give, this was Angie Thomas's first book, but you also have some old blood in there where authors and illustrators have won Newberys and Cattlecots and even other Horn Book Awards. So it does give a good blend of newer and older authors. The authors are also a blend of male and female, and specifically for this category, that's a pretty even split. But most of the authors are white and American. Some of the books can be difficult to acquire. For example, Cartwheeling and Thunderstorms was surprisingly hard to get. You can't find it in Kirksville, and there are only 3 copies in the St. Louis Public Library system, which I find is kind of odd because that book was only released a few years ago. These books also don't completely shy away from controversy, which I like, but I would prefer that they take other controversies, other societal controversies into account and offer more stories and award more stories that are relevant to different groups of people. But that being said, that kind of alters how you look at the awards, so I'm not sure how that would work out, but there are some ignored people. And my last criticism, ignored communities. And my last criticism would that be the broad categories, because especially with poetry and fiction, there are so many works released each year that fit within these categories. It's hard to find the single best book and then the 2 honor book runner-ups. And in conclusion, I have three main points about this award. It does its job to an extent, in so far that it recognizes excellence in youth or in children's literature, but like I said, it does have blind spots, which leads into my next point. While it does recognize excellence, it also misses a lot of excellence as well because the award is so broad. And my last point is that the award does respond to social influence from from what I've seen, but it is reactive rather than proactive. And by that I mean instead of starting an important conversation, say amongst a family, it would continue on a conversation amongst a family that they've hopefully had with their kid, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but starting those conversations and getting new perspectives, especially as a child, is very important. So kind of what this has shown me, what this prize has shown me, is that prizing is really in a Goldilocks situation. It can be really helpful to parents and teachers and librarians, but it can also be a detriment. If they put too much significance in this one award, they can miss out on a lot of other great awards. That kind of plays into my next point where if the prize is too broad, it misses a lot of important works. But if it's too narrow, it could be too niche, and there wouldn't be very many works to select from, and there wouldn't be a very large target audience to aim this award at. So really needs to be somewhere in the middle where it's helpful to teachers and librarians, but also not the only thing that they consider, and it needs to be large enough to be important, but narrow enough to recognize enough works. So where does this award fit in then? Well, it highlights important works that have been recently released. So these are new and exciting books for kids to get a hold of, but they don't provide the entire picture. Librarians and teachers and parents should really be looking at other awards as well, so that way the kids have a more well-rounded experience with what stories they read. That way they get the best perspective possible, and they get the most out of their time reading.